Hi, everybody. Okay, sorry about that. Because we are doing a recording, I'm going to kind of recap things that I've already gone over a little bit. So this is Tomatoes 101. It's not a full thesis on tomatoes, but it will give you a lot of information to get you started for the growing season. These are some topics that I'm going to cover. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and kind of know that there will be more information coming, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, and then I will try to answer them as we go along. Okay, so I was talking about heirlooms and hybrids. So an heirloom is a variety that has a history of being passed down from generation to generation. All heirlooms are open pollinated, but not all open pollinated plants are heirlooms, because not all open pollinated plants are passed down from generation to generation. Seed companies, they will sometimes call a variety an heirloom if it's like a certain age. If the variety's been around for 50 years, and they might call it an heirloom. Of the varieties that we carry, and these aren't seeds, these are the actual starts that we get from the growers here. Of the actual varieties that we carry, the Glacier, Siberian, Manitoba, and Stupice are all heirloom varieties. Open pollinated on seed packets or elsewhere, you might see it just as OP. And this is where the pollination occurs naturally by either insect or birds or the wind or however the pollen gets there. The plants are usually more genetically diverse. And if plants are pollinated with the same variety, like if a Stupice and a Stupice are crossed, then the seeds will be true to type. So they will still be Stupice plants. If the plants are cross-pollinated with a different variety, like a Stupice and a Taxi, then you get really exciting mystery seeds and you don't know what they're going to do. And that's because it's sort of like when you have a kid, you don't know if the kid's not going to be an exact duplicate of you. It'll be you and your partner. So all of the seeds have the potential to be different. And we have Tumbling Tom, the reds and the yellows, Black Cherry, Early Cascade, Taxi, and then all of the heirloom varieties are open pollinated. Hybrids are usually labeled as F1. And while hybridization is natural, there are most of the varieties of tomatoes that are hybrids are deliberately cross-pollinated, and they're created by us so that we get specific traits in the plants. It doesn't mean that they're GMOs, that's something different entirely. And the seeds of an F1 variety, they are not genetically stable and they are not vigorous plants. And so you can't just save seeds from a hybrid because you do not know what you're going to get and they won't be very good plants. So you'll have to buy new seeds every year. And the ones that we carry are the Sun Golds, Early Girl, Bush Early Girl, Sweet Million, and Super Sweet 100s. There are two kinds of tomatoes. There's determinate tomatoes and indeterminate. If you took my potato class, it's very similar. Determinate tomatoes are also called bush tomatoes because they stay sort of small and bushy. They usually grow to a specific size that's between 2 and 4 feet. And they set all of their fruit at one time, usually over about a 2-week period, depending on the variety. You usually don't need to prune them very much, and they only require a little bit of staking. If you just have a little bit of space, like if you're going to put tomatoes on your deck or if you're going to have them indoors, then determinate tomatoes are really great. Also, if you are planning on canning your tomatoes or if you want to preserve them all at once, then they're a really good choice. The determinate varieties that we carry in starts are the Tumbling Tom red and yellow, the Siberian, the Taxi, the Manitoba, and the Bush Early Girl. And in general, if a variety says that it's a bush or a dwarf, it's probably a determinate tomato variety. Most tomatoes are indeterminate tomatoes. They continue to grow and vine, and they set fruit throughout the growing season. And they get very big. A lot of varieties will get 8 to 10 feet, but it just depends on the variety. And if you look it up, you can usually find out pretty easily about how big they're going to get. They do require staking or the ability to sprawl. I have done well with just letting a sun gold tomato, which got about 10 feet long, just sort of sprawl over my deck railing and did really well, gave me lots of tomatoes, and I didn't have to stake anything. They do tend to ripen later than determinates, and that's because they're putting all of their energy into creating those big long vines at the beginning of the growing season instead of setting fruit. The indeterminate varieties we carry are Big Beef, Black Cherry, Early Cascade, Early Girl, Lemon Boy, Stupice, Sun Gold, Super Sweet 100, and Sweet Million. And I think out of these ones, the Black Cherry and the Sun Gold get the tallest or the longest. They both can get around 8 feet, 8 to 10 feet. In order to keep your tomatoes happy and productive, they really need daytime temperatures that are 70 to 85 degrees, and at night they like to be about 60 to 70 degrees. And this is really critical during pollination. If the temperature is not right, you won't get good pollination. They like their soil that at about 60 degrees. Their humidity, they want to be around 70. They do need full sun, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. If you cannot provide these things, which a lot of times it's very difficult to do here in Alaska, then it's recommended you grow them in greenhouses or in cold frames. If you find a little microclimate in your yard, you can grow them well, and you can grow them in pots or raised beds, and that will help. I have a little corner in my yard that's really warm and for some reason stays a little bit humid, and my tomatoes love it, and I don't need to put them in a greenhouse. But I also grow varieties that I know are going to work well in those conditions. You can also use season extenders like that little pop-up greenhouse in the picture too. So there are different things that you could do, and you can grow tomatoes successfully here in Alaska. Okay, so for location and spacing, you ideally want to plant in full sun, but there are some varieties that will tolerate partial shade, but you will not get as much fruit. If you do plant in the shade, then you want to make sure that everything else you do is perfect. So you want to have excellent soil and moisture and humidity, and everything else needs to be great. And of the ones that we sell, Siberian is the most likely to be shade hardy, but I have not tested that. So that's just from my research based on what I know we carry. There are other varieties out there that you could potentially grow from seed that are supposed to do fairly well in shade. You want to have a garden plan that keeps ventilation in mind to prevent diseases. Tomato plants get very large, they have a lot of leaves, so you do want to space them apart. 18 to 24 inches is a good recommendation, but check your variety and see what is suggested for it. If it's a smaller variety, you might be able to put them closer together, although I wouldn't put them closer together than 18 inches unless you really are short on space. Even if you're container gardening, then I would still space my plants out, because if you put a whole bunch of containers right next to each other, you're still going to have ventilation problems. If you properly space your tomato plants, they will be healthier and they will be more productive. And you want to plan for staking if you have an indeterminate variety. And I would say even if you have a determinate variety, you're going to want to think ahead to staking as well. For soil, tomatoes love well-drained soil. I have really yet to find a vegetable that doesn't like well-drained soil, but they really need soil that can stay moist but not soggy. And if you're planting in a garden, I would dig down about a foot just to see what your soil structure is like, because that's about how far your tomato roots are going to reach. And so you want to make sure that you don't have 6 inches of really nice, perfect topsoil, but then right underneath that is a whole bunch of clay that is not going to drain as well. I always recommend testing your soil so that you can know if you need to add any nutrients or if you need to adjust the pH. And I've got a question. Yes, you will get a copy of the presentation deck. Let's see, you will get the video, the slides. I think they send out a copy of the slides. It's all on the video. I think it's just all on the video. All right. I guess it's just what is here. So you'll just get a video with the slides on it, but you could probably do a screenshot. Okay, essential elements are most accessible to tomatoes and pretty much every other plant in slightly acidic soil. Well, pretty much every other vegetable, really. So if it's a little bit acidic, they can get to those main elements like the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. A pH of 6.2 to 6.8 is pretty good. And if you have any kind of soil and you haven't added compost to it this year, then go ahead and add compost to it because it's not going to hurt. And if anything, it's going to make your soil better. I like to add mycorrhizal fungi to the roots when I transplant them. It's a kind of powdery substance that you can buy. And I just pat it onto the roots and put a little bit into the hole and then pop them in there. If you're going to be container gardening, if you grow in determinate varieties, you're going to want at minimum a 10-gallon container. And for a determinate variety, you're going to want a 5-gallon. But they do better if you give them a 10-gallon, even the determinate varieties. And choose a potting soil that has lots of drainage. I really like the Alaska Earth soil. It's the fishy peat mixed with Pro Mix, and it's made specifically for containers and beds so that it doesn't clog up your containers. It's a really nice, rich soil, and it drains well. But there are other soil varieties out there. That's just one that I really like. For staking, remember your tomato plant is going to get very tall and heavy, and hopefully it will have lots of great fruit on it that's going to weigh it down even more. So even bush tomatoes can benefit from staking because when they set all that fruit at once, they can get really heavy. You want to place your supports when you plant your tomato. So you put them in there, they won't, if you put it in right when you place your tomato, then you're not going to disrupt the roots as much later on. It also ensures that you actually will stake them because it is very difficult to go back and stake a tomato once it gets out of control. You want to really hammer your supports deep into the ground, at least several inches. That way they're not going to fall over because even though your little tomato start looks like a tiny little plant, it is going to get very large and it will tip over the stake if it's not deep enough into the ground. Place it just a couple of inches away from the stem, and then you can secure it with plant ties or clips. I am an old-fashioned twine kind of person. That's my favorite to use. There's gardening twine. There are all kinds of fancy specific tomato clips you can use. And like even old pantyhose works because it's pretty soft and stretchy and it's not going to damage your plants. Watering is really important with tomatoes. It's important with all plants, but with tomatoes especially, because if they don't have consistent moisture, it can cause them to crack. The soil needs to be moist, but not soggy. If you let your plants dry out and then it rains, which it often does here in Anchorage near the end of the summer when we have all the fruit that is on our tomatoes, if you let them stay dry and then we get several inches of rain, they're going to get shocked and they're going to swell with the water and they're going to crack. If you keep the moisture consistent, they are less likely to get shocked and crack. I'm a big advocate for soaker hoses because it avoids getting the leaves wet, and there isn't any splashback where when you spray with the hose, you hit the soil or the mulch and then it bounces back up and gets on your plant, and that can harbor diseases and cause problems. Tomatoes do wilt when they are both underwatered and when they are overwatered because they are kind of dramatic, and In the middle of the day, if it's really hot, if they are overwatered, sometimes they will wilt to try to get rid of that excess water. So I wait until the evening when it's cooler, and if my tomato plant hasn't perked back up, or if it's not looking like it's going to perk back up, then I will give it some water. But don't water it in the hottest part of the day, because if it is trying to get rid of some of that moisture, then you're just going to be making it work even harder. Okay, fertilizing. I get a lot of questions, especially in the store, about what the numbers on the package mean. So this isn't technically specific to tomatoes, but the 3 numbers are called the NPK, and each number represents a percentage of that element in the fertilizer. And so if you look at the number on the box that I've circled, it's a 462. The first number is always nitrogen, so that has 4% nitrogen. The second number is always phosphorus, so that's 6% phosphorus. And the third number is always potassium, so it's 2% potassium. And it's just good to know the ratios, because for tomatoes, you don't want a lot of nitrogen. A little bit is good because it's going to give you nice leafy plants and good stems. But what we really are concerned about are the tomatoes. And in order to set good tomatoes, it needs a lot of phosphorus and a little bit of potassium. The ideal tomato fertilizer ratio is about 1:4:2. I have yet to find that, though. I have not found the perfect tomato fertilizer. There are a lot of really good ones, but you want low nitrogen, high phosphorus, and medium potassium. If you have a higher nitrogen when you first plant it, that can be okay, because that's when we want to start developing stems and leaves. But as soon as you get it planted, you want to make sure that you're really focusing on phosphorus. You could also use an Epsom salt foliar spray, and a foliar spray is something that you spray on the leaves, like the foliage. And Epsom salt helps add in magnesium, which will help make your tomatoes sweeter. So a really easy way to do it is 2 tablespoons of Epsom salts to 1 gallon of water, put them in a sprayer, and then spray the leaves once a month. I like to spray them early in the morning. That way they can dry off throughout the day. Fish bone meal is also a good supplement, as is liquid seaweed. So tomatoes are self-pollinating, which means that the flowers have both male and female parts. So wind, insects, and animals can help knock the pollen loose. Bumblebees in particular do something called buzz pollination, where they get in the flower and then they buzz, and that really knocks all that pollen out so that they pollinate better. If your plants are indoors, or if you're in greenhouses and you don't think that you're getting any wind or insects in there, then you can use a cotton swab or a little paintbrush like in the picture, or even a toothpick to help hand pollinate. Some people shake their tomato plants, and that can help, but I don't know, I haven't really found that it makes that much of a difference. Midday is the best time to pollinate. And if your flowers aren't setting fruit, it could be that the temperatures are too high. They need to be at that optimal temperature in order to release the pollen. And then you might not be getting sufficient pollination, so you might need to go in and start hand pollinating. And you could also have too much nitrogen. If you've got too much nitrogen, then the plant's not going to focus on setting fruit. There are fruit setting sprays that you can buy, and those have hormones in them that start the fruiting process, but they don't actually pollinate them. So you might get problems and your fruit might not be ideal. All right, so pinching off suckers is a big deal that people like to talk about. So suckers are little tiny offshoots that grow between a leaf and a stem in the part of the plant that's called the axil. And it should be there on the little diagram so you can see it. If you keep the suckers, which you can definitely do, it means you'll have more potential fruit and possibly more shade for your plant, which can be good so that it doesn't get sun scald. but pinching suckers can really help balance the plant out, and it directs more energy to creating fruit. You don't have to be super religious about this. Every once in a while, I'll let a couple of suckers go through, but it can really help keep your plants in check. And when you're removing suckers, remember to use clean cutting tools. You can use your fingers if you are able to do a really nice clean pinch. But if you can't, or if it's a little bit tough, then make sure you use cutting tools, because if you squish the plant, you can really damage a lot of the tissue. Topping is when you remove the tips of branches that have flowers or fruit that aren't going to have time to ripen. We have a really short growing season here, and so there are going to be flowers and little tiny baby tomatoes that start that are not going to have a chance to ripen at all, or grow to maturity. And so I think that it is better to just cut those off, especially near the end of the growing season, so that your plant will put more energy into ripening the fruit that is going to have a chance to get ripe. When you do this, it's great to keep it at about the same height as your stake. So if your plant is starting to go over your stake, then you can just chop it off right where the stake is. The best spot to do it is below a flower cluster. So on the diagram, if you see it there, and then right above a leaf stem. So that space there is the best place to do it. And remember, clean cutting tools are always your friend. Okay, one of my favorite things is companion planting. Basil is a pretty traditional and common companion plant used with tomatoes. They also taste great together. So basil can mask tomato plants from thrips, and thrips cause a lot of damage. They're little tiny, very slender insects, and they will attack leaves, flowers, and fruits. They can stunt growth of tomato plants, and they can also transmit diseases from plant to plant. So basil helps with that. So you can plant basil near the base of your tomato plant. White clover is a really great mulch. It's a living mulch. It will help control weeds. It maintains moisture. And it's also a shade tolerant plant. So if you have really tall, big tomato plants, it's still going to grow. It's also a legume, so it's going to fix nitrogen in the soil as well, but not at rates that are going to poorly affect your tomato plants. Nasturtiums are another classic companion plant. They repel some insects, but then they also act as a trap crop for others. So aphids really like nasturtiums, and so they will avoid your tomato plant and go for the nasturtiums instead. Marigolds are another one of those classic companion plants. They put out a chemical in their roots that can dispel nematodes that would attack your tomato plant's roots. And in order to do that, though, they have to be pretty close to your tomato plants. And I've also read that it's even better if you've previously grown marigolds in that soil, and then you just plant your tomato plant there, or even other plants it'll work with as well. So the chemical has to be in the soil and pretty close to the tomato roots in order for that to work. Okay, so now we're getting into some problems that you might encounter. There's blossom end rot. I get lots of questions about this every year. So this happens because of inconsistent moisture and inadequate calcium. Calcium is something that the plant needs in order to set and grow fruit properly, but it flushes out of the soil really easily. So if you have put off watering your plant for a little bit, and then you all of a sudden douse it, then all of that calcium is going to flush out, and you need to supplement it. There are supplements that you can buy. Folical is one. We sell it here in the store. It's really easy to apply. The best way to take care of it, though, is just to use consistent moisture. Cracking, I touched on, that results from high temperatures and sudden changes in soil moisture. So make sure you keep your plants regularly watered so they don't get shocked after a hard rain. I do a pretty good job of keeping my tomato plants watered, and I still get a little bit of cracking after those heavy rains that we get later on in the season. And applying mulch will also help to moderate your moisture in your soil. So if you don't use the white clover, you can use something like straw. This is something called gray wall or blotchy ripening. Usually it's attributed to shade and cool temperatures. In other parts of the world, it can also be too hot of temperatures. Soggy soil, so soil that isn't draining. Remember, you want moist soil, but not soggy. They don't want to sit in the water. It can also happen after you give them too much nitrogen or if they don't have enough potassium. So try not to do those things. Provide consistent moisture and low nitrogen and feed them a high potassium fertilizer. There are a few different kinds of blights. Late blight is one of them. It's caused by kind of a fungus-like organism, and it affects the whole nightshade family. So I talked about it a little bit in the potato class. It's the blight that caused the potato famine in Ireland. Don't plant tomatoes where potatoes have been, and don't plant tomatoes where tomatoes have been. Make sure you don't reuse your soil for tomatoes. And rotate your crops. Keep your foliage dry, so don't spray the leaves, or if you have to spray the leaves, do it in the morning so that they have time to dry off. You can use some fungicides to prevent it, but they have to be used preventatively. So you can't, once it occurs, you can't really fix it. You have to use the fungicides before it even happens. And that's not true of all blights. Other blights you can use a fungicide for. It's just this particular one, you can't use it after it's already occurred. I've had a few questions about this before, where you see little bumps or bristly things on your stems. So tomatoes have adventitious roots, which means that at any part of the root, or adventitious stems is what they have. So any part of the stem, they can grow roots from. That's why you can plant tomatoes really deeply, because they will just start growing roots out of their stem. And so this isn't a problem when they show up, but it could indicate a problem. So it might be a reaction to irregular water or a fungus infestation. Right after there's a really heavy rain, sometimes you'll start to see these. If your tomato plant falls over and there is soil around, it will start growing roots out of its stem, and it will root down. So it'll just be a big horizontal plant. This is something pretty cool that you can do with kids too. You can top off your tomato plant and stick it in water, and it will start to grow roots anywhere along the stem that it's in water. Looks pretty cool. If you have unripened tomatoes, which you most assuredly will, you want to pick them before the first frost. Make sure that they don't have any defects, so you don't want any cracks, no soft spots. They should be solid and firm. Perfect tomatoes, except for not ripe. Remove the stems, clean them and dry them, and then you can wrap them in newspaper or put them in paper bags and store them someplace about 60 to 65 degrees, and they will ripen over a couple of weeks. You can also just pull up the entire plant and hang it upside down someplace cool and dark, and over a few weeks they will ripen as well. And once you have the ripe tomatoes, or if they actually ripen on the vine, they're best stored at 55 degrees. They don't do well in the refrigerator, and they don't do well in warmer temperatures. 55 degrees is pretty much where they're not going to continue to ripen, and they won't deteriorate. And that is my overview of tomatoes. So some resources for you. You can always call the Alaska Melon Feed garden staff. We're here to answer your questions. And it's just the main phone number. Just tell them that you need to ask somebody a tomato question, and they will find somebody to answer it for you. This is my favorite book about tomatoes. It's called Epic Tomatoes. He grows a lot of heirloom varieties. So it's focused mostly on those, but he has great tips on how to grow good tomatoes. The UAF Cooperative Extension has publications on tomatoes, and they are also there to answer your questions. They are an invaluable resource. And then I really like the Savvy Gardening website. They have lots of information about gardening, and they're based in Canada, so a lot of their zones are very similar to ours. And now I can answer your questions if you have any. Can I repeat the bit about pinching? Yes, I can. Let me go back. Okay, so pinching. I don't know if you just want me to repeat the whole thing or if you had a particular question about it. But the little suckers, they grow right between the leaf stem and the main stem, and you want to take those out if you want to control the size of your plant and also help the plant put more energy into growing more tomatoes. The best spot for topping. So that's going to be below a flower cluster and above a leaf stem. So if you see that flower cluster there that they have highlighted, kind of the spot that's right below it would be a perfect spot. I would do it right above the leaf stem. So kind of right where the sucker is growing out is where I would top off my plant. And suggestions where you can get compost if we're not currently making our own, in the valley preferably. I don't know about places in the valley, unfortunately. I know that we sell a lot of compost here, but I don't know where in the valley to get it. I'm sorry. Let's see, how far away should fan be away from plants? I don't know, are they adult plants or are they seedlings? If they're seedlings, then you want them a few inches away, just enough to move the plant and circulate the air, but not put too much stress on the plant. So usually I've got mine about a foot or two away, and just on low. And if you have a fan going in your greenhouse, then you don't need it directly on your plant. A recommended height for most tomato plant varieties. Yeah, so the indeterminate varieties, they will just keep growing and they will get very tall. So I would say I would let them grow as tall as you can, but I would top them off at the top of their support. So however big of a stake you can give them, I would only let them get that tall. They're more manageable that way, and then the plant is more supported. So staking with the string method, it's a good way to do it. It's a little bit more in depth than this class really allows time for. Yeah, there are a lot of resources out there. I know in the Epic Tomato Plant book that I put in the resources, he does talk about the string method and how to use strings for staking. And so that would be a good resource there. Do you suggest using the cages to put the plant in? I do for some of the tomato plants. If it's going to be a determinate variety, I think they work really well because the cages are usually only about 4 feet tall. We do sell some really tall, very sturdy cages. I think they're like, I don't know, close to 6 feet tall. And those are great for the more indeterminate varieties as well. I really like bamboo stakes too. And you can also use a combination of a tomato cage with a bamboo stake next to the stem. That way, when the plant gets taller and you run out of room on the cage, you can start tying it into the bamboo stake. So once you observe thrips on a plant, the best treatment method, there are a couple of different sprays that you can use. once they're already there, it's hard to get beneficial insects around. You kind of need to start that to begin with. But there are some sprays, even organic ones, that can work well. And also just sort of spraying down your plant with water really sharply, like a sharp blast of water, can help dislodge them, but they are so small and very good at hiding that I think that one of the sprays would work. Safer makes one End All that is pretty good. And then there's also, I believe, a specific tomato and vegetable spray for pests that works well. Are terracotta plant water spikes a good option for consistent watering in a greenhouse? The spikes can really help with watering in a greenhouse. I would just keep an eye on them. I wouldn't trust them completely. You're still going to need to monitor your plants to make sure that they're getting enough moisture and that they're not getting too much moisture. All right, so your tomato starts from seeds are always thin and spindly, and how can I get them to grow thicker and more sturdy? All right, so if you've got spindly tomato starts, there are a couple of things you can do. You can make sure that your light is at the proper distance away from them. So you want it to be pretty close, within 8 inches, and it needs to be a fairly bright light. I like the T5s a lot, and those are the fluorescent lights. You can also use a fan, a gentle fan on them will help them grow thicker and more sturdy. And then when you transplant them, you can remove the first 2 leaves that come out, and you can plant them fairly far down. So I would remove the first 2 leaves that come up, the cotyledons, and then when I transplant them, I stick the stem down in the soil all the way up until the first set of true leaves. These are really good questions. You are making me think. All right, so I will wait a minute or two and, oh wait, we got another question. I heard they like acidic water. Do you recommend anything special about the water you give them? You know, I have not heard that about acidic water. That's really interesting. I would have to do some research on that. I do know that they tend to like dechlorinated water, and they don't like it when the water is too cold. Those are the 2 things I know about what they like. So it can be really helpful if you put your water in your watering cans and then let it sit out for overnight so that the chlorine can evaporate out of it. But I don't know anything about the acidic water. I'm sorry. The sweetest tomatoes to purchase, my absolute favorite tomatoes are these Sun Golds. They are very sweet and they are enormous, and I have never had problems with them ripening here during our summers. They're my absolute favorite, and I grow them every single year. They are very sweet. Do you think transplanting the seedlings multiple times creates stronger plants instead of one transplanting? I do think that it's better to transplant multiple times. If you just do it once, then you don't give the roots that can grow off the stem enough time to really set. So I think that I usually transplant mine 3 or 4 times before I put them outside. And I grow my Sun Golds. I grow mine outside, but you would need to see what your yard is like in order to do that. But I'm in a zone 4B, and I've got a lot of really good direct sun, so they're always in full sun, and I'm able to grow them in a kind of sheltered area, and they do very well outside. I haven't had to do them in the greenhouse at all. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the class. If you do have any more questions, feel free to give me a call. I'll be here this weekend. Thank you so much for your questions. They were really great, and happy tomato gardening.